Well, fortunately, we wouldn't be responsible until January of this next year, so we'd be looking at the next fiscal year's budget. And I think realistically, most of the money is spent on salaries, and a lot of that goes to police and fire. So the way that's going to be handled, I think you're already seeing it, is that they've got a freeze on. If you assume $100,000 per employee, that's just rough, but if you could assume that amount, and you assume maybe 50% or 50 people dropping out, retiring over the year, you're probably going to have, just by its attrition, you'll be able to save about $5 million. And I mean, that's clearly what they're doing now, and that will continue so that you will have an ability to save that way without having to cut back, at least without having to lay off. The problem, of course, is that those retirements come without really any consideration as to the need for the job being done. So you have some unfulfilled work, and that unfilled work is not being done as a result of a direction by the city manager, but because somebody decided to retire. So then you're going to have to make the tough decision of which spots are we going to fill. That's going to be the tough way to handle it. So I think in the future the question is going to be, not are we going to lay people off, but what spots are we going to fill? And you're going to have to continue, I think, to try to keep police and fire at as full as possible, and then and that keeps in mind other areas as well, which are related to safety, but not maybe directly in police and fire. You have other positions which are crime prevention, such as the peacekeepers and officers who are in the schools, all of which goes to crime prevention, which might not necessarily be seen as police. So I think that's the issues before us right now. Well, I spoke out in favor of that settlement at the last meeting of the City Council. I was concerned about the extent of the general plan. I thought it was overly aggressive in terms of the amount of area that it would take in and the amount of population that it proposed. I think your editorial board mentioned that growth has been a problem for the city over the years because it hasn't always taken into consideration the environmental effects. So yeah, I was concerned about that, and I think it's probably a good settlement. It does not change the boundaries, does it? It doesn't change the long-term population that can come into Stockton, but it puts teeth to the idea that you're going to encourage infill, and I think that's important. And I think the main thing is that it takes into consideration the environmental effects of things. Again, I don't want to overquote you guys, but you did say that green is a new reality and has to be taken into consideration. And to me, the effect of that settlement was not to change the boundaries at all, but merely to say, if you're going to have growth, you have to take into account the environmental effects of that. Well, I haven't read that contract, but they do have an MOU, and the MOU does provide that they will look to certain cities to determine what that pay rate should be based on. It's going to be tough to get around a contractual obligation like that. I'm not sure why we were looking at. I think Glendale is the one that they're looking at specifically, which would tell you what the increase should be, and we are not equivalent to Glendale, at least in terms of cost of living, certainly. I mean, the prices down there in terms of residential home prices would be much higher. So I'm not quite sure why we have that, but we do have a contractual obligation. That's going to be tough. We can't just walk away from that. And if we try to buy our way out of that, that's going to be expensive as well. So, quite frankly, I don't know quite how that's going to work itself out, but we do have contractual obligations that we have to live up to.